The ancient corridors of Windsor Castle echoed with the soft footsteps of Lady Camilla as she walked through the dimly lit hallways late one evening. The moon cast long shadows through the tall windows, creating an almost mystical atmosphere within the historic walls. She had been living in the royal residence for months now, but tonight felt different. Tonight she had a plan that had been brewing in her mind for weeks. Camilla had always been fascinated by the Queen's legendary jewelry collection. The stories of magnificent diamonds, emeralds the size of eggs, and necklaces worn by queens throughout history had captivated her imagination since childhood. She had heard whispers from the palace staff about a particular collection kept in a special vault, pieces so valuable they were rarely displayed to the public. As she moved through the castle, Camilla's heart raced with anticipation and nervousness. She had studied the patrol routes of the royal guards for weeks, memorizing their schedules and noting the brief windows when certain areas would be unguarded. The Queen was away on a state visit, and most of the senior staff had accompanied her, leaving behind only a skeleton crew to maintain the castle. The plan had formed gradually in her mind. She knew about a service entrance that led to the lower levels of the castle, where some of the more secure storage areas were located. Through careful observation and casual conversations with palace staff, she had learned that the jewelry vault was protected by both modern security systems and traditional methods that had been in place for generations. Camilla had convinced herself that she wasn't really stealing. In her mind, she was simply borrowing a few pieces to wear to an upcoming charity gala. She rationalized that as someone close to the royal family, she deserved to wear such magnificent pieces, especially for such an important social event. The jewelry would be returned, she told herself, and no one would be the wiser. She had prepared meticulously for this moment. Hidden in her private chambers were tools she had quietly acquired over the past month: a small flashlight, gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints, and a detailed map of the castle's lower levels that she had sketched from memory after numerous exploratory walks. She had even practiced the route in the darkness of her own room, counting steps and memorizing turns. The castle seemed unusually quiet tonight. Even the usual sounds of settling stone and distant traffic from the nearby town seemed muted. Camilla took this as a good sign, interpreting the silence as the universe aligning to help her mission. She moved with purpose but remained cautious, pausing at each corner to listen for approaching footsteps or voices. As she descended toward the lower levels, Camilla's mind wandered to the specific pieces she hoped to find. She had seen photographs of Queen Victoria's sapphire parure and had dreamed of wearing the stunning blue stones against her skin. There were also rumors of a diamond tiara that had belonged to Queen Alexandra, pieces that would make her the envy of every woman at the charity gala. The temperature grew cooler as she moved deeper into the castle's foundations. The modern lighting gave way to older fixtures, and the walls became thicker stone rather than the decorated surfaces of the upper floors. This was the functional heart of the castle, where centuries of royal treasures were stored and protected from both thieves and the passage of time. Camilla paused at a heavy wooden door that she believed led to the corridor housing the jewelry vault. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the handle, the weight of what she was about to attempt finally settling upon her shoulders. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that she was not a common criminal but simply someone who appreciated beautiful things and deserved to wear them. Unknown to Camilla, her movements had not gone entirely unnoticed. Royal Guard Sergeant Thomas Mitchell had been on duty for nearly 20 years and had developed an almost supernatural sense for detecting unusual activity within the castle walls. Earlier that evening, he had noticed small irregularities, a door that was slightly ajar when it should have been closed, footprints in dust where no one should have been walking. Mitchell had learned to trust his instincts during his years of service. The royal family's security depended not just on sophisticated alarm systems and cameras, but on the human element, the trained eyes and ears of guards who knew every sound and shadow of the ancient building. Tonight, his instincts were telling him that something was not quite right in his domain. Sergeant Mitchell had begun his evening patrol with routine efficiency, but as the hours passed, subtle signs began to accumulate in his trained mind. A faint scent of unfamiliar perfume in a corridor where only male guards typically walked, the barely perceptible sound of fabric rustling in areas that should have been empty, and most telling of all, the soft click of a door closing somewhere in the distance when all residents should have been in their quarters for the night. Mitchell was a man of few words but keen observation. His colleagues often joked that he could hear a pin drop 3 floors away, but they also respected his uncanny ability to prevent problems before they became serious incidents. He had thwarted 2 previous attempts to breach castle security during his career, and both times it had been his attention to small details that had made the difference. As he made his way through the upper floors, Mitchell decided to deviate from his standard patrol route. Instead of following the predetermined path that would take him through the main reception areas and staterooms, he chose to investigate the service corridors and back passages that provided access to the castle's more sensitive areas. His heavy boots made deliberate sounds on the stone floors, partly to announce his presence to any would-be intruders. Meanwhile, Camilla had successfully navigated through the wooden door and found herself in a narrow corridor lined with metal doors. Each door bore a small placard indicating its contents. Some contained historical documents, others housed artifacts from various royal collections. The air was dry and temperature-controlled, designed to preserve the invaluable items stored within these chambers. Her heart pounded as she located the door marked with a discreet crown symbol, which she had learned from her research indicated the jewelry storage area. The door was secured with both a traditional lock and a modern electronic keypad. Camilla had hoped to find an unlocked door, or perhaps a simpler security system, but she had prepared for this possibility. From her small bag, she withdrew a device she had purchased from a questionable source in London's underground market. The seller had assured her it could bypass most standard electronic locks, though he had warned that it might trigger silent alarms in more sophisticated systems. Camilla had weighed the risks and decided that the potential rewards justified the danger. As she worked with the device, connecting it to the electronic keypad, Camilla's mind raced with excitement about the treasures that lay just beyond this barrier. She imagined herself wearing the Queen's diamonds at the charity gala, the way the other attendees would gasp in admiration, and how she would become the center of attention for all the right reasons. The device emitted a soft beeping sound, and to Camilla's delight, the electronic lock disengaged with a quiet click. However, the traditional lock still required attention. She had practiced lockpicking on similar mechanisms, watching instructional videos and practicing on old locks in her private chambers. Her fingers worked carefully with the thin metal tools, feeling for the subtle resistance changes that would indicate the lock's surrender. Above her, Sergeant Mitchell had reached the main staircase leading to the lower levels. His radio crackled with routine check-ins from other guards stationed around the castle perimeter, but he chose not to respond immediately. He wanted to maintain the element of silence as he investigated his growing suspicions about unusual activity in his sector. Mitchell moved with surprising stealth for a man of his size. Years of training had taught him how to minimize noise while maintaining readiness for quick action. He descended the stairs slowly, pausing on each landing to listen and observe. The lower levels of the castle had their own acoustic properties, and he was familiar with every echo and sound pattern in these ancient spaces. Camilla felt the traditional lock give way under her careful manipulation, and a surge of triumph coursed through her body. She was so close now to achieving her goal. The heavy door swung open silently on well-maintained hinges, revealing a small antechamber that led to the actual vault. Motion sensor lights activated automatically, bathing the space in soft, warm illumination that was designed to showcase the beauty of the items stored within. The antechamber contained several display cases with less valuable, but still significant pieces. Brooches, rings, and smaller necklaces that were part of the royal collection's secondary tier. But Camilla knew that the real treasures lay beyond another door at the far end of the room. This final barrier was more sophisticated, with multiple locking mechanisms and what appeared to be a pressure-sensitive floor system. As she studied the final obstacle, Camilla heard something that made her blood turn cold, the distant but unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps on stone stairs. Someone was coming down to the lower levels, and based on the measured, purposeful rhythm of the steps, it was likely a security guard making an unscheduled patrol. Panic began to set in as Camilla realized she had 2 choices: abandon her mission now and try to escape undetected, or press forward quickly and hope she could complete her objective before being discovered. The footsteps seemed to be getting closer, echoing through the stone corridors with increasing clarity. She could even hear the subtle jingle of keys and equipment that suggested this was indeed a guard approaching her location. Mitchell had reached the bottom of the stairs and was now moving through the corridor that led toward the storage areas. His flashlight beam swept systematically across doorways and intersections, and he noticed immediately that one of the doors that should have been secured was standing slightly open. The crown symbol on the door told him exactly which area had been breached, and his training kicked into high gear. Mitchell's years of training had prepared him for exactly this moment. His hand moved instinctively to his radio, but he hesitated before calling for backup. Experience had taught him that hasty actions could sometimes make situations worse, especially when dealing with someone who might be inside the castle legitimately, but had simply made a poor decision. He decided to investigate further before raising a general alarm that would wake the entire castle staff. The sergeant approached the open door with careful deliberation, his flashlight held low to avoid casting obvious shadows that might alert whoever was inside. He could see light spilling from the antechamber, and the soft sounds of movement confirmed that someone was definitely inside the jewelry storage area. Mitchell positioned himself beside the door frame and listened intently, trying to determine how many people might be involved and whether they posed an immediate threat. Inside the antechamber, Camilla's panic was reaching critical levels. The footsteps had stopped, but somehow that was even more terrifying than when they had been approaching. She knew with sickening certainty that whoever was out there had discovered the open door and was probably planning their next move. Her elaborate plan was crumbling around her, and she faced the very real possibility of being caught red-handed in one of the most secure areas of the castle. The final vault door seemed to mock her with its sophisticated security systems. Even if she had hours to work on it, she doubted her ability to bypass such advanced protection. But she had come too far to give up now, and desperation drove her to make increasingly risky decisions. She pulled out her lock-picking tools and began working frantically on what appeared to be the simplest of the multiple locking mechanisms. Mitchell made his decision. Rather than confronting the intruder immediately, he chose to observe and gather information. He activated the silent alarm system that would alert castle security headquarters without making any audible noise. Within minutes, additional guards would be moving into position to seal off all possible escape routes. He then positioned himself where he could see into the antechamber while remaining hidden from view. What Mitchell saw surprised him greatly. Instead of a professional thief or foreign agent, he observed a well-dressed woman working nervously with lock-picking tools. Her movements were clumsy and desperate rather than skilled and confident. This was clearly someone who had planned this operation, but lacked the expertise to execute it properly. Mitchell's tactical assessment shifted from treating this as a potential national security threat to handling what appeared to be a case of extremely poor judgment by someone with access to the castle. Camilla's hands shook as she worked on the vault lock. Every small sound seemed amplified in the silence, and she was certain that her rapid breathing could be heard throughout the entire lower level. The lock mechanism was far more complex than anything she had practiced on, and her amateur skills were proving completely inadequate for the task. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool temperature of the storage area. The pressure-sensitive floor system added another layer of complexity to her situation. She had noticed weight detection panels in front of the vault door, and she suspected that stepping on them incorrectly would trigger additional alarms. Her research had not prepared her for such sophisticated security measures, and she was beginning to realize how naive her planning had been. Mitchell observed the woman's increasingly frantic behavior and made another tactical decision. He could see that she was becoming more desperate and potentially more dangerous as her situation deteriorated. Sometimes cornered individuals made unpredictable choices that could lead to injuries or worse outcomes. He decided it was time to intervene before the situation escalated further. Stepping into the antechamber doorway, Mitchell cleared his throat loudly and announced his presence in a calm but authoritative voice. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step away from that door and turn around slowly with your hands visible." His tone was firm but not aggressive, designed to de-escalate rather than provoke a panic reaction. Camilla's world collapsed in that instant. The voice behind her confirmed her worst fears and shattered any remaining hope of completing her mission undetected. Her body went rigid with shock, and for a moment she considered ignoring the command and continuing her desperate attempt to open the vault. But reason prevailed over desperation, and she realized that her situation could only get worse if she failed to cooperate. slowly. Camilla turned to face the guard, her hands trembling as she raised them in a gesture of surrender. The lock-picking tools fell from her fingers and clattered onto the stone floor, the metallic sounds echoing through the chamber like the final notes of a funeral dirge. She found herself looking at a tall, serious-faced man in the distinctive uniform of the Royal Guard, his eyes reflecting both professional alertness and what might have been disappointment. Mitchell studied the woman's face and immediately recognized her as someone he had seen in the castle's upper levels during recent weeks. This was not a stranger who had somehow infiltrated the building, but rather someone who belonged in the castle and had chosen to abuse that privilege. The recognition made the situation both simpler and more complicated. Simpler because there was no immediate security threat to the royal family, but more complicated because this involved someone within the trusted circle of castle residents. "Lady Camilla," Mitchell said, his voice carrying a mixture of recognition and regret. "I need you to understand that you are in a restricted area without authorization, and your actions tonight constitute a serious breach of castle security. I'm going to ask you to remain calm while we sort this situation out." He could see the fear and shame in her eyes, and despite his professional obligations, he felt a measure of sympathy for someone who had clearly made a terrible mistake. The weight of her situation began to sink in as Camilla realized that her identity was known, and her actions would have consequences far beyond anything she had imagined when she first conceived this plan. The charity gala that had seemed so important now appeared trivial compared to the magnitude of her current predicament. The silence that followed Mitchell's identification of Camilla stretched for what felt like an eternity. She stood frozen in the antechamber, her mind racing through possible explanations, excuses, and escape scenarios, but finding no viable options. The reality of her situation was becoming clearer with each passing second, and she could see her carefully constructed life beginning to unravel before her eyes. Mitchell maintained his professional composure while internally processing the implications of this discovery. As a senior member of the Royal Guard, he had dealt with various security incidents over the years, but never had he encountered a situation involving someone from within the castle's trusted inner circle. The protocols for handling such incidents were clear, but the personal dynamics made everything more complex. "Lady Camilla," Mitchell continued, his voice steady and measured, "I need you to walk toward me slowly and keep your hands where I can see them. We're going to move to a more secure location where we can discuss this situation properly." He gestured toward the corridor behind him, making it clear that cooperation was not optional, but also avoiding any actions that might escalate the tension. Camilla's legs felt weak as she began to move, each step feeling heavier than the last. The tools she had dropped seemed to represent not just her failed mission, but the destruction of her reputation and standing within the royal household. She had always prided herself on being sophisticated and elegant, but now she felt like nothing more than a common criminal caught in the act. As they walked through the corridor, Mitchell's radio crackled with quiet communications from other guards who had responded to his silent alarm. He spoke in coded language to update them on the situation, indicating that the threat level was minimal, but that the incident required discreet handling due to the identity of the individual involved. The last thing anyone wanted was for this situation to become a public scandal. The journey through the castle's lower levels felt like a march of shame for Camilla. Every familiar corridor and stairway now seemed to judge her actions, and she wondered how many people would know about this incident by morning. The castle staff were generally discreet, but news of such a dramatic breach of trust would be difficult to contain completely. Mitchell led her to a small security office located on the ground floor of the castle. The room was spartanly furnished with a desk, several chairs, and walls lined with monitors showing feeds from security cameras throughout the building. It was here that serious security matters were typically discussed and resolved, away from the public areas of the castle where discretion was paramount. "Please have a seat," Mitchell said, indicating a chair across from the desk. His manner remained professional but not unkind, and Camilla detected a hint of sympathy in his eyes that gave her a small measure of hope. Perhaps this situation could be handled quietly without destroying her life completely. She sat down carefully, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity despite the circumstances. Mitchell activated a recording device and stated the date, time, and nature of the incident for the official record. Castle security protocols required documentation of all significant events, and this certainly qualified as significant. He then looked directly at Camilla and asked the question that would begin the formal investigation into her actions. Lady Camilla, can you explain what you were doing in the restricted jewelry storage area tonight? His tone was neutral, giving her an opportunity to provide her version of events without prejudicing her response. Mitchell had learned over the years that people often revealed more through their explanations than through direct interrogation. Camilla's throat felt dry as she struggled to find words that might somehow justify her actions. The carefully constructed rationalizations that had seemed so reasonable in her private chambers now sounded hollow and pathetic when faced with the reality of her situation. She realized that any explanation she offered would sound like the desperate excuses of someone caught in an inexcusable act. I wanted to borrow some jewelry for a charity gala, she began hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought that as someone close to the royal family, I might be allowed to wear some of the pieces for such an important social event. I know I should have asked permission, but I was afraid the request would be denied. Mitchell listened carefully to her explanation, taking notes and observing her body language for signs of deception or additional information she might be withholding. Her story had the ring of truth to it, however misguided the reasoning might be. This appeared to be a case of monumentally poor judgment rather than criminal intent, but the security breach was still serious regardless of motivation. Lady Camilla, Mitchell said after she had finished her explanation, I need you to understand the gravity of what you've done tonight. You've accessed a highly restricted area without authorization, attempted to bypass multiple security systems, and put the safety of invaluable royal artifacts at risk. These actions constitute serious violations of castle security protocols and potentially criminal behavior. The weight of his words settled over Camilla like a heavy blanket. She had been so focused on her desire to wear beautiful jewelry that she had completely failed to consider the broader implications of her actions. The royal collection wasn't just valuable in monetary terms. These pieces represented centuries of history and cultural heritage that belonged to the entire nation. Mitchell's radio crackled again with an incoming message. That made both of them tense. Sergeant Mitchell, we have word that Her Majesty's schedule has changed and she may be returning to the castle earlier than planned. What's the status of your situation? The voice belonged to the head of castle security, and the implications of the Queen's early return added urgency to an already complicated situation. Understood, sir, Mitchell replied into his radio. The situation is contained and under control. I'll provide a full briefing within the hour. He looked at Camilla with renewed seriousness, realizing that time was now a critical factor in determining how this incident would be handled and what consequences she would face. The news of the Queen's potential early return transformed the atmosphere in the security office from tense to urgent. Mitchell realized that what had been a manageable internal security matter could quickly become a major diplomatic and public relations crisis if not handled properly. The Queen's return would trigger increased security protocols and media attention, making it much more difficult to keep this incident contained. Mitchell made a quick decision that would prove crucial to how events unfolded. Instead of immediately escalating the matter to his superiors, he chose to gather more information and attempt to understand the full scope of Camilla's actions. His years of experience had taught him that hasty decisions in sensitive situations often led to unnecessary complications and worse outcomes for everyone involved. Lady Camilla, he said, leaning forward in his chair, I need you to be completely honest with me about everything that happened tonight. Did you actually remove any items from the storage areas? Are there any other people involved in this incident? The answers you give me right now will significantly impact how this situation is resolved. Camilla's mind raced as she considered her response. She realized that this might be her only opportunity to demonstrate that her actions, while inexcusable, were not part of a larger conspiracy or criminal enterprise. Her honesty in this moment could determine whether she faced criminal charges or might somehow find a path toward redemption. No, I didn't take anything, she said with genuine conviction. I couldn't even get past the final vault door. The security systems were far more sophisticated than I had anticipated, and I'm not skilled enough to bypass them. As for other people, I planned and attempted this entirely on my own. No one else knew about my intentions or helped me in any way. Mitchell studied her face carefully as she spoke, looking for signs of deception. His experience in security work had made him adept at reading people, and he believed she was telling the truth about not actually stealing anything and acting alone. This information was crucial because it meant the incident could potentially be classified as attempted theft rather than actual theft, and there was no broader security network to investigate. The sergeant's radio remained quiet for several minutes, giving him time to think through his options. He could follow standard protocol and immediately turn the matter over to his superiors, which would likely result in Camilla's arrest and a full criminal investigation. Alternatively, he could recommend that the matter be handled internally through castle administration, which might allow for a more discreet resolution. Meanwhile, Camilla sat in agonizing silence, watching Mitchell's face for any indication of what might happen next. She thought about her family, her reputation, and the charitable work that had been so important to her. All of these things now seemed to hang in the balance, dependent on the decision of a man she had never really spoken to before tonight. Mitchell made another crucial decision. He picked up the secure telephone on his desk and dialed a number that connected him directly to the head of castle security. Rather than making a formal report through radio channels that could be monitored, he chose to discuss the situation privately with his superior officer. "Sir, this is Sergeant Mitchell. I have a sensitive situation that requires your immediate attention, but I believe it can be handled discreetly if we act quickly." He proceeded to provide a concise but complete summary of the evening's events, emphasizing Camilla's cooperation and the fact that no actual theft had occurred. Camilla could only hear one side of the conversation, but she could tell from Mitchell's tone and responses that he was advocating for some form of lenient treatment. The phrases she caught, "when no harm done," "extremely poor judgment," and "learning opportunity," gave her hope that perhaps her life wasn't completely ruined. After several minutes of discussion, Mitchell hung up the phone and turned back to Camilla. His expression was serious but not entirely grim, suggesting that the conversation with his superior had produced some positive outcomes. However, she could also see that significant consequences were still pending. "Lady Camilla, here's what's going to happen," Mitchell began, his voice carrying the weight of official authority. "The head of security has agreed that this matter can be handled internally, rather than involving criminal prosecutors, but only under very specific conditions. First, you will be temporarily relocated to quarters outside the main castle, while a full security review is conducted. Second, you will undergo a comprehensive evaluation to determine whether you can ever be trusted with access to sensitive areas again." Relief flooded through Camilla's body at the news that criminal charges were being avoided, but she also understood that her life was about to change dramatically. The temporary relocation would be a form of exile from the world she had known, and the security evaluation would determine whether that exile might become permanent. "Third," Mitchell continued, "you will be required to provide a full written statement detailing your actions and motivations, and you must agree to participate in whatever additional interviews or evaluations are deemed necessary. Finally, this incident will be documented in your permanent record, and any future security concerns involving you will be treated much more seriously." The conditions were harsh but fair, and Camilla realized that she was being offered an opportunity for redemption that she had no right to expect. Mitchell's discretion and the security chief's willingness to avoid criminal prosecution represented a second chance that few people in her position would receive. "I understand and accept all of those conditions," Camilla said with genuine gratitude. "I want you to know that I deeply regret my actions tonight, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to make this right without destroying my entire life. I'll do whatever is necessary to demonstrate that this was an aberration and not representative of who I really am." Mitchell nodded, satisfied that she understood the gravity of her situation and appeared committed to making amends. However, he also knew that the real test would come in the days and weeks ahead, as she demonstrated through her actions whether this incident had truly been a learning experience or simply the first sign of deeper problems. The following weeks brought profound changes to Camilla's life that she could never have imagined when she first conceived her misguided plan to borrow the Queen's jewelry. Her temporary quarters in a modest cottage on the castle grounds felt like exile from the grandeur she had grown accustomed to, but they also provided her with time for serious reflection about her actions and priorities. Mitchell had become an unexpected ally during this difficult period. His decision to handle the situation with discretion rather than immediate punishment had saved her from criminal prosecution, but more importantly, his professional approach had given her a framework for understanding the serious nature of her breach of trust. She found herself respecting him more than many of the aristocrats she had previously considered her social equals. The comprehensive security evaluation proved to be more thorough and challenging than Camilla had anticipated. Professional investigators examined every aspect of her life, from her financial situation to her personal relationships, looking for any signs that her attempted theft might have been motivated by factors beyond simple vanity. She underwent psychological assessments designed to determine whether she posed any ongoing security risk to the royal family. During these evaluations, Camilla was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about herself that she had previously avoided. The investigators' questions revealed that her desire to wear the Queen's jewelry had been driven by deeper insecurities about her place in royal society and her need for external validation. She began to understand that her actions had been symptoms of personal issues that needed to be addressed regardless of the security implications. The charity gala that had seemed so important when she first planned her jewelry heist came and went without her attendance. From her cottage window, she could see the cars arriving at the castle for the event, and she felt a complex mixture of regret and relief. The jewelry she had risked everything to obtain would not have solved her underlying problems, and her absence from the gala forced her to question why such social events had seemed so crucial to her happiness. Mitchell visited her several times during the evaluation period, partly for security purposes but also because he had developed a genuine concern for her welfare. During these conversations, he shared insights from his years of observing people in high-stress situations, helping her understand that her actions, while inexcusable, were not unprecedented among people struggling with the pressures of royal life. "Lady Camilla," he said during one of these visits, "I've seen many people make poor decisions when they feel like they don't belong or aren't valued. The important thing now is what you choose to do with this experience. You can either let it define you as a failure, or you can use it as a turning point toward becoming someone stronger and more genuine." His words resonated with her more deeply than the expensive therapy sessions she had attended in London ever had. Mitchell's practical wisdom came from real-world experience rather than academic theory, and she found his perspective both challenging and encouraging. She began to see her current situation not just as punishment for her mistakes, but as an opportunity for genuine personal growth. The security evaluation ultimately concluded that Camilla did not pose an ongoing threat to royal security, but it also recommended significant restrictions on her access to sensitive areas of the castle. She would be allowed to return to royal society, but under conditions that would prevent any repetition of her attempted theft. The investigators had determined that her actions were motivated by personal insecurity rather than criminal intent. More importantly, the evaluation process had revealed Camilla's genuine remorse and her commitment to rebuilding the trust she had violated. Her cooperation throughout the investigation and her willingness to accept responsibility for her actions had impressed the security professionals, who had dealt with many individuals who blamed others for their poor choices. The Queen's early return to the castle had ultimately worked in Camilla's favor rather than against her. Her Majesty had been briefed on the incident and had personally approved the decision to handle it internally rather than pursuing criminal charges. The Queen's wisdom and experience had led her to conclude that true justice sometimes required mercy, especially when the individual showed genuine potential for redemption. 6 months after that fateful night in the jewelry storage area, Camilla was finally permitted to return to her original quarters in the castle. However, she was no longer the same person who had attempted to steal the royal jewelry. The experience had fundamentally changed her perspective on what was truly valuable in life, and she had discovered strength and purpose that didn't depend on external symbols of status. Mitchell's vigilance and professional handling of the incident had not gone unnoticed by his superiors. He received commendations for his discretion and judgment, and his approach to the situation became a case study in how to handle sensitive security matters involving trusted individuals. His career continued to flourish, and he eventually became head of castle security himself. Years later, when Camilla had re-established herself as a respected member of royal society through her genuine charitable work and personal growth, She would often reflect on that night as the moment her real life began. The jewelry she had once coveted seemed trivial compared to the authentic relationships and meaningful work that now filled her days. Most importantly, she had learned that true security came not from possessing beautiful things, but from being a person worthy of trust and respect. The incident remained classified in security files, known only to a select few individuals who understood the importance of second chances and the power of redemption. Mitchell and Camilla developed a friendship based on mutual respect, and she never forgot that his vigilance and compassion had saved her from destroying her life completely. In the end, his intervention had protected not just the royal jewelry, but also the possibility of Camilla becoming the person she was truly meant to be.